Hey, it's Mo Egger. Whether it's pro football or college football, and no matter who you root for, there's no better place to post up for the game than Long Neck Sports Grill. 3 locations in Northern Kentucky, Wilder, Hebron, and Richwood. Each Long Necks has 4K TVs all over the place, and the sound is on for all the big games. They've got an extensive menu. You've got to try Long Neck's wings, and no place in Northern Kentucky or anywhere has a better beer selection. This football season, Long Neck Sports Grill. Stay long. Come often. All right, we typically do this on Wednesdays. We moved it back an hour this week for scheduling purposes because we came on late due to the NKU broadcast. But we talk injuries once a week with one of the experts from OrthoCincy Orthopedics and Sports Medicine. The great thing about OrthoCincy is they've got specialists and locations and services all over the tri-state. And this includes walk-in orthopedic urgent care at 5 different locations with extended evening and weekend hours in Edgewood and Anderson. Learn more at OrthoCincy.com. That's OrthoCincy.com. Dr. Brandon Kohrs from OrthoCincy is with us. So we have to start by talking about DJ Turner, who unfortunately is out for what feels like the season with a clavicle fracture. Now, I hear clavicle and I hear collarbone sometimes. It makes me feel like clavicle is just another word for collarbone. Is that the case?
Clavicle is another name for collarbone. Those are the same thing. So the clavicle, collarbone, it's a bone that connects the sternum, so the inside of the chest, out to the scapula bone. Not really a true connection. There's ligaments there, which you can have issues with as well, usually the lateral ones. But yeah, so clavicle, collarbone, same thing.
Do injuries like this often heal without surgery?
A lot of them can, and that depends on, especially in DJ's case, depends on a few things. Depends on the displacement of the fracture, if you have any shortening. So when you break a bone, you can break it, and you can call it, what we call a hairline fracture, where you see a line, but it's not displaced. It means it's not off. It means that you look at it and you can't really. It's hard from far away. It might even be hard to notice the fracture. And so if you have a non-displaced fracture or a fracture where the ends are still pretty close, especially collarbones tend to do pretty well with non-operative management. You can treat those without surgery. Now, and an NFL football player who's going to be involved in a lot of collision-type activities, you might tend to lean towards something more surgical if you have any displacement, shortening, or if you have any concern that might not heal in its current alignment and position.
Can you compare the timeline for recovery based on not having surgery, and then if you were to have surgery?
Yeah, so surgery, non-surgery, and this is true in any injury, surgery doesn't often improve the amount of time it takes something to heal. Now, it can improve the alignment and the return to activities, return to function. So if you fix something with a plate and screws, you might get somebody back, a few weeks sooner. But, ideally you avoid surgery if you can, but if you need it, you do it. And, it looks like he might be getting a second opinion from somebody. And so to me, that means that, if it's displaced, if it's significantly shortened, this is something that's kind of a no-brainer. You're taking him to the operating room, getting him fixed up. Just the fact that, it doesn't sound like he's had surgery yet. It sounds like we're getting some other thoughts on this. Potentially this could be something you treat without surgery. But, they're talking about no guarantees he's out the rest of the year. I think you're at least, 6-8 weeks minimum. If all goes well, and even that might be pushing it. You give this thing a good 2 or 3 months before it's really solid, and you're increasing vitamin D. You're doing some different things to try to get this to heal a little quicker. But these are things that, take a while to heal. But if you give it time, you should make a full recovery.
So DJ Turner suffers a broken clavicle, lands hard on his shoulder. And, at face value, I feel like I see guys land on their shoulders all the time. And then I'm watching Gardner Minshew of the Raiders lands hard on his shoulder. And then he's out for the season with a broken collarbone. And it feels like, I feel like I watch football every single week and I see guys land on their shoulder all the time. And yet, relatively speaking, there aren't that many injuries like the ones we're talking about right now. Why is that?
It is rare. I think you have to hit it right, and it takes a certain amount of, certain angle, certain velocity in order to break that bone. And, everybody's different. There are people, where you see their brothers and, their entire siblings that come into your clinic and they say, oh, yeah, well, we've been in here before with Johnny and, Larry and everybody else. And, sometimes I think maybe there's a certain genetic predisposition that, your bones maybe they're too brittle, maybe they're too hard. They don't have as much flexibility, or, maybe you're just more likely to break things. I think from my standpoint, from a prevention standpoint, it's making sure, and I think a lot of these guys probably are, it's adequate nutrition, it's adequate protein supplementation, it's vitamin D, especially, public service announcement. It's getting dark out now really soon. And I think I read something recently, if you're north of the 37th latitude, you don't get enough vitamin D from the sunlight anymore, and so you need to be supplementing that. So for the general population, to decrease fracture risk, vitamin D supplementation is huge, eating right. But I think some of it is just the freak nature of these injuries.
All right, that's a good answer. I want to roll through three different players right now. We'll do this pretty quickly here. Start with Orlando Brown. We're all hoping he plays on Sunday against the Steelers. He has missed the last few games. The last one against the Chargers, very close to kickoff. They announced he was going to miss another game with a knee sprain. Can you kind of take me through the determining factors that ultimately made him a no-go right before kickoff?
Right, and some of this, not to, I guess to quote, Spinal Tap, when they talk about how it goes to 11, I think that, when you get there, you get on the field and you're going full go, that's probably the first time you've really tested that knee to that level in a number of weeks. And so you're rehabbing and you're recuperating, but you're not pushing it to the point where, you might aggravate something. So you're kind of doing a little sub-threshold training where, you're not significantly risking re-injury, but you're also getting stronger. And a lot of these situations, you're not really going full go until the second you step onto that field, because you want to maximize the amount of time you can recover. And sometimes you get out there and you say, this still didn't work. And I tried to go hard and I can't. And the last thing you want is to go out there and, be a left tackle and not be able to move and risk additional injuries.
Let me ask you about B.J. Hill. So he came out of the game against the Chargers, was helped off the field, came back. He has been dealing with injured ribs, something that he originally was dealing with early November in the game against the Raiders. Now, I think of football, and I think of a guy who plays the interior of the defensive line, and I don't know how you play with injured ribs, with strained ribs. So can you tell me what happens when ribs are strained?
I would look at this as more of a stretch type injury where, it's either a direct impact, so you could strain things, you could sprain, strain. And, let's be real, a lot of the terminology that's used is a little vague, so it's difficult to understand exactly what's going on. But, what I would say of that is your ribs help you breathe, right? So those are consistently expanding, contracting. And if you have an injury to that, rarely surgical, but if you strain or stretch some of those ligaments, some of that fascia in there, it can be quite uncomfortable, and it can take a while to heal and fully recover, because you can't not use your ribs to breathe. So it's not like you can put his ribs in a sling for 4 weeks and tell him to relax. It's kind of important. So I think this is the type of thing that maybe lingers a little bit, and you do some stretching, you do some breathing exercises, and you try to work on getting his conditioning up and hopefully getting it back in there.
All right, one more I want to ask you about. Brandon Graham of the Eagles, who's had a really long career, 15-year vet. I'm watching after the game when they played on Sunday, and he had played a great game, but he was very emotional because he's apparently done for the season with a torn triceps. What stood out to me about this was he apparently had been dealing with tendinitis in his triceps. And, each of us at some point feels like we all deal with tendinitis, whether it's just weekend warrior, something you do, just byproduct of maybe getting old, that sort of thing. And so I haven't heard of tendinitis turning into a tear. Is that your guess what happened here?
I think so. I think that whenever you have tendinitis or even tendinosis, which is more of a chronic breakdown, a chronic what we call tendinopathy of a tendon, that can result in some weakness where the tissue isn't as good. I mean, I've seen people before too where you're almost, the mechanism doesn't exactly make sense, where these people aren't doing enough to warrant really tearing their tricep, and they do. And you go in and look, and when you go in for surgery, you're like, man, this tissue isn't great. It's not like this nice, healthy tissue that you would expect. It's a little off. It's a little different. And I think a lot of times that, if you you have tissue that isn't as great and you're putting a lot of force through that arm, I think that can increase your risk of injury. I mean, that could be, chronic patellar tendonitis or tendinosis, or rotator cuff tendinosis, that's chronic. I do think that these injury or these chronic issues where maybe you don't have as good a blood flow to that area definitely can predispose you to have an increased risk of injuring that. So I think you keep it strong, you're doing exercise, you're doing what you can to improve the health of those tendons. It can decrease the risk of injury in our general population.
Very good. Dr. Brandon Kohrs, thank you so much. There you go. Dr. Brandon Kohrs from OrthoCincy's. I say this every single week because it's true, and I believe it. The great thing about OrthoCincy's is they have specialists and locations across the tri-state, including walk-in orthopedic urgent care. That's walk-in, so no appointment needed. Weekdays 9A to 9P, and Saturdays 9A to 1P at both Edgewood and Anderson. I took my daughter when she broke her foot to Anderson, and my cousin took his little boy when he had a recess injury to Edgewood. It's easy because you don't need an appointment, and it's definitely cheaper than going to an ER whenever you have an urgent orthopedic injury. Go to OrthoCincy.com. That's OrthoCincy.com. Hey, it's Mo Egger. This football season, no matter who you root for, no matter if it's college or pro, you can catch every game at Long Neck Sports Grill. They've got 4K TVs all over the place, and remember, the sound is on for every big game. And if you haven't tried Long Neck's wings, what are you waiting for? There's tons of other great stuff on the menu, and no place in Northern Kentucky has a better beer selection. Locations in Wilder, Richwood, and Hebron. Long Neck Sports Grill. Stay long. Come often.